Hello, good afternoon. My name is Juan Felipe Rincon. I'm with the Google Search Quality team out of Dublin. And welcome to the fourth installment of how to optimize your mobile website, particularly targeted at those of you who work in or own small, medium businesses. Over the series of last four presentations, we've walked you through some of the tips and techniques you can use to make your existing web pages mobile friendly in preparation for our upcoming algorithmic change that we'll be launching on April 21st. So let us start with the presentation for today, and then we will follow questions. The presentation should take about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we will answer some of the questions that have already been submitted. And if you have any additional questions, you can just add them by clicking on the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen. So let's get started. We talked in the previous sessions about the tools that you can use to check your pages for mobile friendliness and to help you solve the problems that your pages or your website as a whole may be having and displaying on mobile devices. We talked about the CSS modifications you can make to define and HTML modifications you can make to define the viewports for your pages, the zooming behavior, and how to avoid plugins. We talked in the third session about the size of buttons and tap targets and setting margins and proper font sizes. And today we're going to be talking about a topic dealing with redirects and canonicalization, which is particularly important for those of you who manage two different websites, where you have a special website for mobile devices and another website for everybody else. Sometimes this is described as an M-dot website, and you might hear me make reference to that. And when I say M-dot, I would be talking about the mobile special website. And today we'll talk about some of the things you need to do in order to make that work. Specifically for two-site setups, it's important for you to know that Google doesn't actually have a preference between whether or not you have one site or two sites to provide mobile-friendly content to your users. As long as the pages and assets that are necessary to render the individual pages are available to Googlebot, we really don't have a preference either way of one site to two site or what have you. You may very well, though, have a preference, particularly those of you who are in small, medium businesses, which is that separate sites do require additional attention from you and do require additional work to get the best results and to make sure that the users actually find the correct pages. We will talk about some of those techniques. This presentation may come across as a little bit complex and hard to follow. That is one of the reasons why we do recommend responsive design, because this can actually be something that one could easily get wrong if one is not careful or doesn't have a clear plan in sight. First thing you need to do, if you have two different websites, is that the equivalent pages on your mobile website and on your website for everything else should have bidirectional annotations. What are those? Those are these specific tags that you include within the header of the HTML of the page itself, where you specify on the main page, let's say the desktop page, call it the www page, where you specify that there is an alternate version of this page that would be appropriate for devices or for media where on a screen it's being displayed and that screen has a maximum width of 640 pixels. That is telling, and on the corresponding page that link points to, in this case, the page on the mobile, on the M-dot website, it specifies that there is actually a canonical version of this page sitting at another href, meaning you're creating a connection between the first page, the desktop page, and the mobile page, and saying the desktop page is the canonical version, and there is an alternate version for screens that have a maximum width of 640px at this location, m.example.com. This is something you have to do on every corresponding matching page. So let's say you have example.com/products. On m.example.com/products, you would do the same bidirectional annotation, and so on and down the line. This is assuming that some or all of the pages on your desktop site have corresponding m-dot versions. If you are not using two different websites, but instead you're using one website where you do user agent detection and when you detect that the user agent of the user's browser is a mobile browser, you send a mobile-ready page, and when you detect that the user agent is a desktop browser, you send a desktop page. It is important that your server communicates in the HTTP header includes the very element or the very header, and specifies that it is varying based off of user agent. This will specifically tell Googlebot that when it fetches this page with different user agents, it may receive different HTTP content. Be aware that this does mean you should be presenting to Googlebot what you would show to a user, depending on whatever user agent they're using, either for mobile or for desktop. And if you don't include that, then you're not giving a cue to Googlebot that your page is actually responding to the user's device by detecting the user agent, which could mean that Googlebot does not identify that your page is mobile friendly because it doesn't know that it will respond in a mobile version if it were using a different user agent. So you've done the canonicalization, you've linked all of your individual pages, you've set the bidirectional tags, or you've set up your very headers on your HTTP, the very header in your HTTP headers on your server. The other thing you need to do is to ensure that the redirects on your pages are correct. Generally speaking, if there is a mobile version of your page, and they land on a different URL but off of the device that corresponds, then do an appropriate redirect to the mobile version. Let's say you're on the mobile device, a user lands on the desktop version of it, redirect them to the mobile version of that page if you have it. That's a good behavior. And the follow-on is, if there is not a mobile version of that desktop content, you're better off redirecting them to the desktop version instead, rather than actually showing them an error page. Then you should make an effort to try to make the content available on mobile. But broadly speaking, if you have a user that's already on your page, and you do have content to serve that user, ideally that content is mobile friendly. But if it isn't mobile friendly, at least give them that specific content in the desktop version, because they may have to do additional navigation, but they'll get it. This, however, you should only see it as a temporary fix. Really, your objective should be to make sure that your m.website is your full website is a robust version of your website, and that you're not seeing it as a partial solution. Now, the other thing you have to watch out for is avoiding faulty redirects, because they're supremely frustrating for users. And you've probably encountered this, where you go to, let's say, an example website. You land on the shopping page of it through search results. You go to that page, you land on it, and then it redirects you to a mobile version, but not the mobile version of the shopping page, but the mobile version of the landing page. So you wanted to actually go see the product catalog, instead you landed in the main page. And this gets even worse when you're going into deep articles, for example, on blogs or on media sites that have particular information. So if somebody sees an article that they're interested in reading, and they get the URL for the desktop version, the desktop server detects that the user is on a mobile device, and it redirects them not to the mobile version of that article, but to the landing page of the mobile version. That is a terrible user experience, and in fact, that we will put up a notification on search results when we detect that that happens, to tell the user this may not take you where you think it's going. Don't do that. Instead of doing that, do this. Redirect people to the appropriate page. Don't do just a basic redirect to the mobile version and call it a day. Really do the map between your individual pages. See if there's a pattern between the URLs in your mobile version and your desktop version, and then try to make that path consistent across the board. That way, whether your user is on a mobile device or on a desktop device, they are getting your valuable content, and you're not forcing them to run through additional hoops. The other thing to do is, if you have two versions of your website, give the user the option to go to the desktop version of your website. Add a link to the footer of your pages to give them the opportunity to do that, particularly if you aren't confident about your redirects or your canonicals. And then give them also the option to go to the mobile version of your page if you have that on your desktop. Ideally, you want to have everything configured properly and making sure that your user is automatically sent to the right page. But if the user is having a really poor experience on mobile, you might want to, at the very least, give them the option to go back to your desktop version of it, and then keep them on that for the duration of that session. Now, these are only temporary measures, if you have dual site setups. What you really should focus on when you have two sites is to make sure that the experience of a user landing on your mobile page or on your desktop page is equally attractive, equally pleasant, equally informative. If you don't do that right, if you don't get that right, particularly if you don't get the redirects right, this is the warning that may actually show up in search results to tell the person, you may not end up where you think you are going to land if you click on this search result because the canonicals are not correct. So what you want to do is actually check your pages on your search results using an actual phone. Test if they take you to the right URLs. And if they don't take you to the page that you found, the deeper pages in particular, then go back and look at what's going on there and figure out a way of addressing it through either proper canonicalization or proper redirecting. These redirect issues are in fact such a problem and they create such a bad experience that we take the time to tell you where they are within Webmaster Tools. And if you go to the URL section of Webmaster Tools, you can actually debug where exactly those redirects are located, and it'll help you address those problems across your whole website. We encourage you to use that tool if you have them. The other piece, what you get if you do the redirects properly. If you set up your redirects and your canonicalization on your website properly, Google can do an additional couple of things automatically that will save users time and will save you server resources. In particular, something called a skip redirect. When we know that the search result might be showing the www version of a page, but there is an alternate version of that page for the particular device at a different site, when the user clicks on the www.link, it would actually take you to the appropriate version for their device automatically, without the user hitting your server and without your server having to actually do the 301 or 302 redirect to the mobile version. It saves the user anywhere between half to 1 second of traffic latency, particularly on a slow mobile network, and it also saves you from having to deal with the web server traffic. A redirect isn't particularly expensive as a server operation, but if you don't have to do that operation, it's particularly better. So it's faster user experience, and it's free to you and free to the user. But that only happens if you have your canonicalization properly set up. With that, that concludes today's formal presentation. We do encourage you, again, as we've run through the previous sections, run the mobile-friendly test on your site, run page speed insights on your site, particularly to make sure that you're actually having proper behavior on both your desktop and mobile behaviors. Read the Webmaster's Mobile Guide to get a lot more detail about how canonicalization and rel alternate work. There we have a variety of both good informative articles and videos that talk about this in detail. And if you have difficulties with getting this right, if you find that this is a little bit more complicated than you thought it would, there's a fantastic community of very helpful contributors to our Webmaster forums that you should go visit and engage with. Ask questions; they will answer your questions. They'll give you support. Google team members will also participate in those discussions and will give you appropriate answers and guidance. Take advantage of those resources. Certainly, you've joined us in this Hangout, so you may very well be following us on Google Webmasters. If you aren't already, you may follow us on Twitter as well at Google WMC, where we'll post announcements and feedback. And with that, I'll shift over to, thank you very much for your attention. I'm Juan Felipe Rincon. And with that, I'll shift over to the questions that you've left in the Q&A page. So let's make that happen. Let's see, with question number 1. So what happens, this is from Helen Schrader. Thank you, Helen, for your question, first of all. What happens if you have mobile-friendly and non-mobile friendly pages on your site? Is the mobile friendliness page or site specific? And if it is site specific, how will the non-mobile friendly pages affect the rankings from the optimized pages? The mobile friendly ranking is on a page level. So each page is evaluated independently for its mobile friendliness, which means that if you have a combination of mobile friendly and non-mobile friendly pages on your site, the individual pages will be evaluated, and the mobile friendliness of this will be one of those ranking factors that will be evaluated when deciding where to position it in search results to a user's query. That means you're not being your site as a whole isn't being evaluated, and your pages aren't being evaluated as a whole. They're being evaluated individually. I hope that answers your question, and thank you for it. We have a couple of questions from Claire Cooter. First, number one, desktop has more specific product pages than mobile, which is just basically a product overview page. Do you serve the desktop version of the pages that don't specifically exist in mobile, or add alternate tags to most relevant page? I hope that the presentation provided some guidance on that. What you would want to do is, when you have a mobile version of the page that the user is directed to from search results, give them that page. Let's say if they land on your page because it shows up in search results as a desktop and you have a mobile version of it, make sure that you send them to the mobile version if it's appropriate for the device. If you don't have a mobile version of that page, then rather than giving them an error, serve them the desktop version of the page, because that's the useful information. And then use the traffic flow that you see to identify which of your pages you should actually be making sure are mobile friendly, if you can't get all of the pages to be mobile friendly at the same time. The other piece is, if you're going to go through the trouble of adding alternate tags to your pages, try to see if you can do that systematically to all of the corresponding pages. That's one of the difficulties of having a two-site setup, is that you have to be doing that pairing. If you want, you need to be doing that connection if you want Googlebot to make that connection for you, because you're being explicit, saying these two pages are the same page, except that this is the mobile version and this is the desktop version. If you don't do that, Googlebot does not know that those are the two versions of the same page, and that may end up resulting in your actual results for those pages to not be what you might want them to be otherwise, or what they could be otherwise. So I hope that answers that question, that first question. And then the second question from Claire is, when mapping mobile versus desktop, do you need to take into consideration the very HTTP redirects and making sure you're adding mobile tags to the same page that the HTTP redirects have been implemented for? The very header is for when you're actually varying the content of that page based off of a particular element, and in this case, it's vary based off of user agent. So when you have two websites set up, you're not actually using that header. You're doing redirects appropriately based off of some characteristic that you're identifying of the browser. So consider the vary header for when you're actually using the same URL, the same URL structure, but you're delivering different HTML based off of a user agent. You might be doing that based off of of a mobile device or not, or some other component of the user agent that you're choosing. I hope that answers that question as well. We had an additional question from Edward Roth on, hello, we have a desktop and separate m.mobile site. What is the best practice for app deep linking? Should we put the rel alternate to the app pages on the desktop site, or m.site, or both? That's a really good question, Edward, and I'm not sure I have the best answer for you on it yet. I will have to research on it, and I will get back an answer to you within the thread of this video, because there are a variety of variances there that I actually don't know about. I will look up into that and give you the answer on that. And my apologies for not actually being able to answer that. Let me see. We have a question from. We have an additional question here from Frank. Frank actually asked an extensive question on the thread regarding two elements. And so I'll read it aloud as opposed to I'll tag it so that you can see it, but then I'll read it aloud so that you can you can get along there. I'm afraid I won't make it to watch the video live. Sorry if you addressed this point during the video. Here's my question. There's a complex setup of different language subdirectories for a particular subsite, and then a variety of subproduct sites, each of which point to a main domain. So how to actually set up the canonical tags and the alternate hreflang tags. The responses provide the I can tell you, Frank, what I'm seeing on your site in terms of that one we'll have to dig into in a lot more detail, because it involves actually it would involve looking at the various combinations of what you're trying to accomplish and where the traffic should go. You did have a question below on what the different meta tags had to do with, and including the meta properties of OG title and OG site name. Those general are actually all independent, and when you're making the difference between the meta title tag, which actually is indicating this is the title of the page, there are particular OG tags properties that you're including, which are Open Graph properties, which are actually for integrating with other sites. So those are basically, the meta tags are particular additional information about your document that different consumers of that page may or may not use for particular purposes. So when you have the OG title tag and the separate title tag and the OG site name tags, those are actually not all duplicates or redundant to each other. They're used for different purposes. The OG are Open Graph tags that are used, if I'm not mistaken, by Facebook and other social media sites to actually identify how to present your page within share components. So the key question you're asking there, though, is how whether or not those affect anything regarding the canonicalization of your pages, which they don't. And the other question you had is these may make the page too heavy. I wouldn't worry about the weight that these add. These in general are very minor components that are added, and they don't necessarily mean that all of these elements are loaded. In particular, they're loaded when they're actually interacted with by those parts that are consuming them. So I hope that this was I hope that addresses the questions. There's a lot more detail in there, so I'll try to go into the page itself and make sure that I answer those, that I address them, or that you have answers for those. And then we have a question from Barry Schwartz on whether or not in the news box in the search results will also be affected by the mobile-friendly ranking algorithm. Stacy from the Google News team said that in the news box is a web search thing, and she does not know. Barry, I can tell you that I don't know the answer to that either, but I will find out for you. I don't believe that it is being affected at this point, but that doesn't mean that it isn't. So what I'll do is I'll look up the answer and I'll respond in the thread to this video. Thank you for asking it. I very much appreciate it, and I'll get back to you on that. And with that, that is the totality of the questions that we have. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you for following us along during these 4 sessions. We very much appreciate your attention. I hope they've been useful. Please let us know if they've been useful. If there are additional topics that we should cover, if there are additional questions that you may want a more detailed explanation of. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I hope that you are able to make your web pages as mobile friendly as possible over time. And I hope that those efforts actually yield the results that we're confident that they will yield for you. Thank you very much, and take care. Bye bye.